this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and this is Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on. They'll appear here in my chat room, and we can talk directly. And I love spending this time of day with you. I hope that you enjoy spending this time of day with me. And I love the fact that we get viewers from all over the place. I find that very encouraging. Today, I wanted to talk about relevance. Yesterday, we were talking about the need to value the advances in society and how these improve our lives, to be mindful of where we've come from, not in the romanticized way that people often do look at this subject, but also in a very practical way. As I was saying, 100 years ago, many people relied on outhouses. These last few days, when the weather has been under zero, I am so glad to have indoor plumbing. It wasn't that long ago that we didn't have things like cell phones or even phones themselves, if you come down to it. Go back a couple of 100 years, and there was nothing like that. And I think that we're far better off for having them. And that has kind of given way to today's subject of relevance. I was asking myself, what am I going to talk about today? And relevance suggested itself because in the end, relevance really is the main subject of so many things. Are you relevant? We've been talking for some time now about the Witchy Awards and other awards in the community. And I may talk about that again today, but I've been pointing out how much this can mean to creators. One of the reasons is it shows if you're being relevant or not. If you're going to be a creator, are you relevant to the people you are trying to reach, or are you just doing it for ego reasons? Are you saying things that have meaning for people? And if you're not, why are you doing it? That's the kind of thing an award can show a person, or even a nomination. That's the kind of thing that comments in the chat room show. And and hello to Janet in the chat room. And one of the things I like about this program is that I can see people's comments as they're making them, and they're often very gratifying comments. They remind me that I have been relevant, and I think that, and we've talked about the concept of relevance for many years, but that question, and hello to Renee in the chat room, of relevance, I think, is always probably the most important question. When you're a creator like this, hello to Vanessa in the chat room. The question of whether what you're doing is relevant is very important, but in your everyday life, both your own relevance and the relevance of situations are very important. One of the things I like to talk about is choosing your fights. I see a lot of people who spend a lot of time in conflicts that have little meaning and offer them no benefit if they win, and sometimes a lot to lose if they don't. And they'll put huge amounts of energy into what basically is a hole in the ground. I see this very often in our pagan community, where the things people often fight about aren't really relevant to the things that give our community sustainability or help us to move forward. It seems like it's always easier to get people to expend their energy on side issues, things that really don't seem to offer a lot. But that also is a way of avoiding the responsibility that comes with relevance, of paying attention to what you're doing and trying to do it well. I think that one of the things I remember, my great aunt Edith, back in the 1980s, ended up in a nursing home after a bad fall. She was only there for a short time, but I remember visiting her there And the old saw about people sitting in nursing homes waiting to die was very clearly demonstrated in those visits. There were people sitting there, um, just sitting there crying and otherwise deeply depressed because there was nothing in their lives. And I don't know that it's still that way now. And I've visited other nursing homes that weren't like that, but I do remember this one for that quality. And she wanted out as quick as she could get out. And in fact, she ended up dying in her own home. But, in asking myself, how do people get into that situation where they're basically being warehoused until they die? And, one of the big aspects of that is having lost all relevance. Um, and how do you do that? Well, you stop paying attention to your relevance. In that case, many of them had lost relevance even to the people who they loved most, lost relevance to their family, lost relevance to the world around them, to the point that they became just a commodity. And, by that point, I don't know if there's anything they could have done about it. But I think if they'd paid, in some cases, and in some cases it was purely a physical issue, but in many cases there was more involved than that. If they'd paid more attention to their relevance earlier, they might have found a different fate. Um, I look at people, one of the things I've often talked about are those elders who like to complain that nobody listens to them, nobody's willing to learn from them. Well, that's a sign of having lost your relevance. And what do you do when you've lost your relevance? You have to ask yourself, well, what would give me relevance? What matters in this situation that I can talk about, that I can work with, that would give me relevance for people to want to be involved with me? When I attempt to select topics to talk on this program, that's one of the things I ask myself: is this something anyone will care about? Um, and I think some of the things we've talked about did fulfill that purpose. I don't know. I'm sure they don't all, but I think we've talked about some things that were very relevant, and not always for the same reason. One of the subjects we did not too long ago had to do with how to write a book. I think that's very relevant to a lot of people, but not everyone. But it might be interesting to many people. We've talked about psychic and magical skills and um, theology and all sorts of different things. Um, and my goal is always to try to remain relevant to what people want to know. And it's not always an easy subject to deal with. And this is why I often ask people what they want to hear. Sometimes I am more responsive to that than others. Um, but I try to be responsive to it and to deal with things people would like to know. I do remember people wanted to hear more about numerology. I suppose we should go back to that subject again soon. Perhaps we might talk about isopsiphos, which is a Greek form of numerology, which might be interesting to discuss. But when we talk about things like the Witchy Awards, the Sacred Path Awards that came out recently, um, our Corellian Merit Awards that we do periodic that we do at twice a year, originally at Lustration Time, now more as their own event. But these things all help to show what is relevant, help to show what is important to people. And if you are in a position where you're creating content like this, or if you're in a position of leadership or you're in a position of teaching, speaking to what's relevant to people is very important. Um, and sometimes it may be necessary to help them to realize what's relevant. Other times they already know what's relevant. Um, and sometimes what you think is relevant is not what they're going to think is relevant, and that can be very frustrating. I have always felt that the political issues facing our community were one of the most relevant things that we really needed to deal with. And by and large, the community has never felt that way. I think that that definitely for me has been a great frustration over the years. But people are all on their own path, and what is relevant to one is not always relevant to another. But I still come back to that subject and speak about it because I think it's important. But I also try to speak to things that I find people simply want to hear about, want to talk about. Um, what I try not to talk about is irrelevant things that would just be filling the time. Over the years, as I've dealt with my career, as we have dealt with our careers, we often ask ourselves, what is the most relevant thing that we can do? What is the most relevant thing we can focus on? And at one time, clergy standards was one of the major answers that the community gave. I remember at the 21st Century Pagan Leadership Conference here in Hoopeston, Illinois, that was the main topic of conversation. What really is required to be considered clergy? And in the end, for us, the answer was, what does the law require to consider you clergy? And not what is your ideal situation, but what is the actual legal situation? And that was the path we followed. And hello to Kazan in the chat room. It's good to see you. There are so many moments when different things will become relevant. And looking back over my career in the pagan world, the community has changed a lot. And what has been most relevant is certainly not always the same thing. Certainly what's been relevant for me has not always been the same thing. And I have to say, as I talk about this subject of relevance, looking forward for, say, the next 10 years, I'm very curious to see where the greatest relevance is going to lie. I think a lot of the answer depends on things far beyond our control, things happening in the wider society. I still think that the political aspect is possibly the most relevant of all, even if it's the one that people least want to deal with, because, politics are moving very quickly. And in some ways, they're going in directions that are good for us. In some ways, they're threatening to go in ways that are not good for us. And as I often say about our image, if we want to control, or if we want to have a say in how we're perceived by society, we must control our own image. Similarly, if we want to have an influence on our own political position in society, we must be prepared to be involved in it. We must be prepared to stand up for our rights, to pursue our rights, because we can't think anyone else is going to do that for us. And there are plenty of people out there, and we all know, who are busy campaigning against the rights of minority religions like ourselves, of minority lifestyles like ourselves. And hello to Rev Melanie in the chat room. It's good to see you, Melanie. And we need to be equally cognizant of what needs to be done to defend those rights if we wish to keep them. We have been very fortunate to have a number of very highly motivated people in our community who have been very focused on civil rights. Selena Fox, Pete Pathfinder Davis, Sir Edward, Patrick McCullum, to name a few, to name the most prominent ones. But in a lot of ways, we've been very fortunate for the time we've lived in and the precedents we've been able to appeal to. A lot of times we've won our civil rights fights because someone else already won them for us. And we were able to say this should be applied to us too. Not because we actually won the fight ourselves, and we need to be mindful of that. And when we look at what is relevant to our future, I guess it comes back to the question, what do we want for our future? I mean, all of my life, one of the great goals that people kept repeating was, we want to be a religion like other religions. We want to have the same rights as other religions. We want to be able to worship and practice openly without having to be worried about our lives. Um, and in my mind, that's still the number one goal. Um, and again, I think we're in a time where a lot of people would like to roll um, certain rights backward, and we need to be mindful of that. I think that's a very important point of relevance at this time. And we have to ask ourselves the question: what are we willing to do to try to maintain our rights as we watch certain groups trying to push back minority rights in general? And if we forget that we are in fact a minority, I think we're going to regret it very, very sincerely. Um, Not too long after, at least as far as our legal standing goes. One of the things I remember from many years ago that I think very few people in our community do remember now is the Helms Amendment. We've talked about this. I talked about it somewhere recently on film. The Helms Amendment was an amendment, I want to say it was around 1988, sponsored by Jesse Helms, um, a man of whom, if there's anything good that can be said, I don't know what it is. But it was basically the idea that um, the definition of religion in the United States needed to be limited to exclude anything that involved the concept of witchcraft. And it was specifically intended to make to make the Wiccan churches no longer churches. There was great activism against this. People worked very hard to push back on it. And in fact, it eventually was defeated. Um, but you just have to look at some of the things being said in politics today to realize there are still people who would like to do that. We're just not high on their agenda at this moment. And this is part of what I mean by relevance. We as a community spend much of our time fighting over identity, fighting over all sorts of things that have very little actual effect on our lives, and often ignoring the things that do. And my message today is that we really must stop and look at those things that do affect us and focus our energies there. And, how do we do this? Well, again, we need those civil rights organizers to continue doing that. But one of the things you'll notice about everyone I mentioned is that they're all older people. I would love to see younger people become more prominent um, in pagan civil rights. I think that we need to be thinking of that next generation. And yet, so often I meet people in this community who seem to be totally bent on beating back the next generation, as if they're afraid of having another generation. And if you do that, you won't have another generation. Or they'll be starting more or less from scratch, despite all that we have done. And they will not see themselves related to us. And I've already seen that happen during my lifetime. Going back to how many people in this community have tended to handle the younger generation, I've watched people beat the younger generation off with sticks virtually. Um, and then wonder why nobody listens to them later, why there aren't younger people wanting to learn from them. Well, the younger people in many cases were there, and you turned them away. And they found other paths. They found other means to move forward. They always will. Um, and speaking of relevance, one of the greatest relevant things we can do is have our doors open to the younger generation, be willing to work with them um, and cultivate them. Because without them, we're going to find ourselves in a lot of trouble as we get older. And this to me is part of that idea of relevance. Relevance is putting your focus on the things that actually help you, and not on things that merely distract you. So, I'm not quite sure what more I can say about that. I think that really kind of makes my point. But I feel that for us to move forward, we must focus on our relevance. The things that we offer, the things that we do. Why would people want to work with us? That is where we must put our attitudes. Um, the idea that people just naturally will is not really a practical attitude. The idea that a lot of people in our community have, which is that they can um, be very exclusive and take only a few, and lots of people will always keep coming, that's not a very practical attitude either. And that's where we get a lot of those elders who are surprised that people stopped coming, people stopped listening. And I think that focusing on our relevance is the way that we change this, the way that we change our present, the way we change our future. And I hope that for you, you will stop and look at your own life and ask yourself, what is most relevant to me now? What should I be doing now as I move forward? What is going to help me most? And what is just frittering away my energy? And, the answer to that will be different for different people. It will be different for what your goals are in life. And going back to that nursing home experience, and as I say, I've been in other nursing homes where I found happy, cheerful people, but that one was particularly depressing. And it really seemed to me like the people there had lost all of their relevance in life. And I cannot really imagine much worse than being in that position. And I think one of the things that some of those people had done is as they grew older, they only associated with other elderly people and eventually found themselves the last one left. Um, and Kazan in the chat room says, same idea. Um, about the Burn the Witch board game, that we need to reduce bullying and violence against witches in community. It can lead to false accusations. Um, yeah, I mean, and this is what I'm saying about we must control our own image. If we're not putting forward our own image, others will put forward their image of us, and it may not be good. I don't really know a lot about that particular subject. Um, I've heard different things about it, but the relevance comes down to the same thing. We cannot, if we do not put forward our own image, if we don't help people to see us as we are, we really have no right to complain if they see us inaccurately. If we do not make an effort to be seen, we can't complain that we're invisible. Um, we have to work on building our image and our presence in that wider community if we don't want, for example, another satanic panic. One of the things that I lived through, and anyone my age lived through, was that satanic panic, which was a very, very frightening time, at first a somewhat confusing time, and also a shocking time when you go back and look at the fact that many of the accusations people were making were not physically possible at the very start. And there were people on the news who were pointing that out at the time and basically just got shouted down by people who wanted to have this moral panic. Um, there are people who were prosecuted for things that physically could not have happened. And fortunately, we had a lot of people, including the people I was mentioning earlier, who did work on building up our, particularly our Wiccan and pagan image, and saying, yeah, whatever this may be, we're not it. Please be aware we're something different, and they were successful. Um, I I remember that time, and this was the 1980s and 1990s. It wasn't long ago, and we need to remember it wasn't long ago, and not just sit here passively watching the show go by. And Kazan says, show them positive image and facts about witchcraft and magic. Exactly. And show them credible, believable people, credible, believable faces, people they know. One of the things I've often said is that, if we look to the LGBTQ community and how they were able to raise the level of acceptance in society, one of the things they did is they pointed out that pretty much everyone knew someone who was LGBTQ, etc. Either someone in their family or a friend. And if they didn't think they knew anyone, it was only because the person they did know or people they knew did not feel comfortable being open about it. And more people became open, more and more people allowed themselves to be seen. And by and large, this did change people's opinions. Um, I think for us to show ourselves um, as reasonable people whose philosophy is simply slightly different is a very relevant thing we can do. And in fact, when we say our philosophy is slightly different, it really isn't all that different. One of the things I've heard again and again from people entering our community is they felt like they were coming home, and that these were things they believed their whole lives. Um, we're not actually as different as we like to think we are. And I think we need to be mindful of that too. Now, I said I was going to come back and talk about the Witchy Awards again. The Witchy Awards have a few more days of voting. You can find them at modernwitch.com/witchcraft and occult media awards. And you'll find there all kinds of different categories and numerous people nominated. And if you have not already voted, I hope that you will go and vote for the people you think should win these things. And, if there's a category you haven't experienced anyone in, maybe you might want to go and sample their work. And in particular, I want to take this moment to recommend the two categories that we are nominated in. Under Best Vlog/Vidcast, Magic TV is a nominee. Magic TV/Pagan World TV has so many different offerings. This program is one of them. And if you enjoy those offerings, I hope you will go and vote for us at the Witchcraft and Occult Media Awards at modernwitch.com. It would be very good for showing us that what we do is relevant, that people do appreciate these efforts. The other thing, under Best Video, is Journey to the Parliament. And Journey to the Parliament is a movie that actually premiered at the last Parliament of the World's Religions in Chicago, the 30th anniversary of the modern Parliament. And it is a series of interviews with pagan parliamentarians talking about their experiences with the Parliament, including how those experiences have changed over the years, how things have grown in terms of the pagan presence at the Parliament. And it is, I think, a very good movie. So if you've not already voted there, I hope you will do that. And I want to thank you for your presence today, and let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for everything that you do for us in our lives, and we offer you our great respect and love. Help us to keep an eye on what is relevant in our lives, and to keep ourselves active in the world and relevant to others and to society at large. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and respect, and knowing you are always with us, but from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always, and I will see you